Good morning, everyone. So, once again, we're working as normal. And it is a normal Virginia cold morning. We're just going to dive into two of my favorite engines here. That's going to be the 6.9 IDI Ford and the 7.3 IDI Ford. Both of these engines have a lot in common. The 7.3 is basically a board over 6.9. They did make a few changes to the 7.3 over the years, but we're going to get into that. Now, why we're making this video is because both of these engines, the IDI Fords, get a really bad reputation that they do not deserve. And let's basically talk about the pros and cons of both. First off, the cons. The 6.9 and the 7.3 IDIs, we're not talking about power strokes. They have very or nothing in common with the power strokes, basically except the displacement. One of the biggest things that we see is people talking or trying to turn these into these powerhouses. Guys, they're not. This is not the engine for you if you're trying to drag race, do quarter mile, any of that stuff, even truck pulling. Not saying they can't be built to do that, but there are better platforms out there that will offer you a lot more options for a lot cheaper. Somebody's going to bring up their cousins, mamas, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, whatever friend that built this crazy off-the-wall twin turbo 7.3 IDI that made, 500 horsepower. That's awesome. However, that is not common. You're going to spend a lot of freaking money doing it and a lot of time. What these engines are good for is cheap, reliable workhorses. I have personally owned 4 7.3 IDIs over the last 2 decades. One of them was naturally aspirated, 3 of them were turbocharged. Now, my cousin also has a 6.9 IDI in a mid-80s Ford that he's had to replace the frame on because of rust and cancer because he uses it as a plow truck. He bought that truck like 20 years ago for nothing. And it has paid for itself probably several dozen times over because that's all he uses it for. It sits pretty much all year long. Oh, I can't talk today. All year long, unless he needs to haul off some lumber or trash or pick up a bed for a neighbor, whatever it might be. Until wintertime comes and they may get 3 or 4 good snows up there. He'll go out there, make a couple grand plowing with it, and then it sits again. A few years ago, we thought that engine was on its way out. We added some injectors to it. No big deal. We got it up and running. Boom. There he has a 7.3 sitting there on his garage floor because we were sure it was dead. All it needed was a little TLC, and that engine refuses to die. The 7.3 IDIs and the 6.9 IDIs are incredibly easy to work on. There's about 1 million videos out there, and you could replace literally the entire fuel system for about $1,000. Guys, that's what it would cost to replace 2, maybe 3 injectors on a modern diesel. That is crazy good pricing. Another advantage is these trucks can be had for dirt cheap. I mean, you can pick up probably a 2-wheel drive for $1,500, $2,000. A good 4-wheel drive IDI can be had for less than $5 or $6 You can even pick up the very well-known, the F450s, the early 90s 450s are absolutely great trucks. Big, heavy-duty Dana ADHD rear ends, 10-lug, big Hydro Boost disc brakes on the back. Guys, if you need a small dump truck, have a small landscaping business, something like that, these are phenomenal trucks. They will tend to last forever if you take care of them. Now, some people talk about the calvation issue. Personally, I have not experienced it. And I have had several with over 250,000 miles on it. I'm not saying it's not a thing. Good maintenance can prevent that. And honestly, if you got a good deal on one, even if the engine went out, you can typically get an engine for one for under $1,000. So, not saying it doesn't happen. I just have not personally experienced that. One issue that I do want to address with these trucks. The fuel return system on them is absolutely terrible. They use these really thin rubber lines with these cheap clips, and probably maybe 50% of IDI issues I see with the Fords are because of the stupid return lines. Now, you can buy the kits to replace all the return lines for like, I don't know, $100, $120 on Amazon. And it does take a little TLC to do. A lot of times, I see them done improperly. People try to route the lines all kinds of different ways. They pinch the lines, just some of the crazy stuff you see out there. There are now companies like R&D, and I'm not sponsored by R&D. I don't get products from them, anything like that. But I do know that they tend to have a decent reputation. They make billet fuel return systems for these trucks now. It's like $260. So if I had the money to buy one and I wanted to really make it reliable, that would probably be the first thing that I would address. Another issue is the glow plugs and the glow plug controllers aren't that great on them, and you definitely need good glow plugs for cold starting these trucks. Period. One easy way to do that is to make sure you don't get glow plugs off Amazon. Go through a reputable source that's going to have a good glow plug that has good reviews. You could source that online, do a Google search. I believe that it has a Z on the end of it. It's the one that everybody likes. Leave it in the comments if I'm wrong. And that will keep them from swelling. That will also make sure you have good cold starts. And the controller, on the other hand, can be finicky. Personally, especially living in a very cold place, when I had the F450, we would see -20, -30 degrees Fahrenheit. I put a manual button on it. I bypassed it and just had a relay. Basically, depending on how cold it was, I'd hold it for 5, 10, 15 seconds, fire the truck up, good to go. That's not for everybody, guys. If you're that guy that can't figure out how to wire in a relay, or can't remember to hold the button for 10 seconds, or want to hold it for 2 minutes, probably not the mod for you. But hey, it worked for me in my application. So let's talk about the later 7.3 turbos. Well, let's go back for 1 second. The 6.9s originally came with like 170-ish horsepower, right around 300 foot-pounds of torque, 310 foot-pounds of torque. That wasn't bad, really. That was more torque than a 351 Windsor would typically have. Fuel economy was significantly better than a 460, and also the power really wasn't that bad. It's a lot better than a 6.2 or 6.5 NA GM. Love you guys. Those engines were a little bit anemic until they got turbocharged. Another advantage to that is that whenever they did go to the 7.3, that power level jumped. It was right around 180, 185 horsepower, right around like 330, 340 foot-pounds of torque. That's not terrible, especially when you're pairing that with like a ZF5 transmission that has a ridiculously low first gear anyway. Even the 4-speeds had very good first gears, so that helped a lot. Behind maybe like a C6 or a 3-speed automatic, I can see how it would be a little anemic, but it still gets the job done. When they went to the turbo models, they made some changes. Obviously, the turbocharger for one, and there's like 2 companies that made turbos for them. Ford had it as a dealer-installed option, a factory-installed option, or you could go aftermarket and get Banks. I think ATS and Banks still make turbo kits for them, and if I'm not mistaken, the newer Banks kit is actually wastegated, which is a huge improvement over some of the previous models. As far as the turbocharger goes, Ford did beef up the internals a little bit. They had better head studs. They had changes to the rods, better rings on the pistons. They also had different oil, or the addition to oil squirters on the pistons. Keep in mind, I'm doing a lot of this off memory, so if I'm wrong, if I say anything that I'm mistaken about, please just leave it in the comments. I've learned just like everybody else does, so just keep that in mind. I know a lot of guys do turbocharge the NA69s and the 7.3s. However, it is one of those things Ford felt necessary to add those beefier components later on as they went to the turbocharged models. Now, fun fact is that Ford actually intended the turbocharged factor to be more of a high-altitude setup. High-altitude kit is what they originally marketed it as. It only supposedly added like 10 horsepower. I think it was like 30 or 40 foot-pounds of torque, which was considerable. But boost was set crazy low. I know on my first 7.3 that had the Ford installed turbo kit, it had the Ford on the actual plenum on top of the manifold. I think we put a boost gauge on it. It was like 3.5, 4 pounds of boost. Now with a couple mods, yeah, we got it up to right around 7 pounds, and the truck was definitely noticeably peppier. But just keep that in mind. My second turbo truck had already some tinkering done to it, and it was making around 8 pounds of boost. And honestly, even playing around 9, 10 pounds of boost was really about as far as I would push that comfortably. I know some guys will push it further. That's you. I go for more reliability. Now, if you can tell, I am currently in a Ford. I am not brand loyal. I've had Cummins, Duramax, Power Stroke, obviously, both 7.3, 6.7 is what I'm currently driving. All engines have pros and cons. But for the 6.9 and 7.3, they are very reliable. And for guys that want to have a small landscaping business, starting out hauling gravel, or maybe just pulling a small utility trailer, whatever it might be, even a small hobby farm or a starter farm, these aren't bad trucks. They get a really bad reputation. I wouldn't recommend pulling a 10,000-pound camper down the highway at 70 miles an hour with one. I think you probably need a little bit more engine and more gears. But they really weren't that bad. Just kind of keep that in mind as you shop around. Keep in mind the glow plug issue, the relay issue for the starting the glow plugs, and also the fuel return. If you run into one that's having issues, it's probably one of those three things, to be honest. The ejection pumps are stupid cheap on them to replace, very easy to replace. Most mechanics can do it. If you're somewhat mechanically inclined, there's about 1 million YouTube videos. Go out there and watch. So this video is rambled on really long. I just wanted to kind of emphasize that these engines don't really deserve the bad reputation they get. Just like any engine, yes, they do have problems, but they're not terrible. So if you've watched this entire video all the way through, once again, thank you. Please like, share, subscribe. If you continue to like these, I'll continue to make these. I never thought we'd have 120 subscribers. That's incredible. And keep doing what you're doing. Be safe out there all the way.